Thomas Sowell is an American economist, social commentator, and a prominent black conservative. In this video, he talked about Malaysia's affirmative action in which he got few things wrong and oversimplified a much more complex situation.
The Chinese, first of all, were making at least twice the income of the Malays.
So what you have there is a minority. A quarter of the population is doing far better than the larger number of indigenous people.
And,
okay.
And what makes it even worse politically, I guess, is that the Chinese started out much poorer than the Malays.
And here he mentioned that Malay was wealthier than Chinese. This never happened. Malaysia was colonized for 400 years. The British colonial policies were designed to maintain socio-political control and economic benefits for the British, rather than to foster economic prosperity for the Malay masses. In the book Malaya, The Making of a New Colony, authored by John Gullick, British colonial administrator and historian, he wrote extensively on the history and society of Malaya. The British colonial administration in Malaya actively promoted and preserved the traditional Malay feudal structure to maintain socio-political hegemony. By enhancing the status and the wealth of the Malay sultans and aristocracy, the British created loyal local elite that would support their rule. As stated, by enhancing the formal status of the Malay Sultan and by restricting the bulk of the Malay population to the rural areas and rural subsistence occupations, the British consciously sought to secure and ensure socio-political hegemony. This strategy ensured that while the Malay elite benefited from British patronage, the majority of the Malay population remained in rural subsistence occupation with limited economic opportunities. British policies systematically hindered Malays from entering the commercial sector, effectively keeping them economically dependent and marginalized. The British imposed restrictions on land use and excluded Malays from the most fertile lands suited for commercial agriculture. Obstacles were put in the way of Malays seeking to obtain footholds in the commercial sector by excluding them from the land best suited to commercial crops. These policies prevent Malays from participating in the more profitable commercial economy, widening the economic gap between them and other ethnic groups, particularly the Chinese who were more involved in commerce and trade. Potential development projects that could have supported the Malay peasantry were neglected because they conflicted with the colonial economic interest. Government attention to this problem might, in theory, have made possible development of Malay processing and marketing cooperative, but this would have cut against the grain of the finely articulated colonial economy. The British economy in Malaya was structured to benefit the Malay landlord and Chinese businessmen, rather than fostering prosperous and independent Malay peasantry. Hypothetical measures such as large-scale water control works and diversification into commercial crops were never implemented, as they would have disrupted the colonial economic framework. In the modern sector, including industries like rubber, wage labor was predominantly non-Malay. The limited opportunities available to Malays forced them into roles that support the colonial administration, such as the police and armed forces. Wage labor was almost entirely non-Malay. The one real chance for Malay village youth to escape these occupations of his forefather was to join the colonial police and armed forces. This lack of economic opportunity perpetuated the cycle of poverty and dependence among the Malay population, while the Chinese community, being more involved in commerce, had greater access to economic advancement. Under British colonialism, Malay were also discriminated in the health sector. Compared with Chinese and Indian immigrants, Malay had a much higher incidence of malaria, unspecified fevers and convulsions. Pneumonia, hookworm and anemia were other prevalent conditions. The hospitals built by the colonial authorities had little relevance to Malay problems. It is important to recognize that these conditions were a result of British strategies, not the fault of the Chinese immigrants who were also seeking better opportunities in the complex colonial landscapes. Here is the data on wealth disparity between Malays and Chinese in 1970, 7 years after Malaysia was formed, and before affirmative action was even introduced. As you can see, most of the wealth was still controlled by the British, while the Malays had almost nothing and the Chinese, despite being a minority, controlled around 30% of the wealth. This is also reflected in employment data from the same period, and this is the poverty rate data.
You're right. Let me quote you to yourself again. No more than 5% of Malays, quote, have been estimated to have actually benefited from these affirmative action programs, and those people who were initially more fortunate were the most benefited, close quote. In other words, the pattern that we saw in India repeats itself in Malaysia. The ones who were already near the top, who
This puts them over the top.
Right, they're capable of grabbing these jobs or the
Yes.
university positions.
Yes.
All right, but it's still a tiny percentage of the overall population.
Here he said that affirmative action primarily benefits the top 5% of Malays. But this outcome is more of a result of the broader dynamics of capitalism and government inefficiency rather than the policy itself. In any capitalist system, wealthy individuals have more opportunities and resources at their disposal. This disparity exists independently of affirmative action, as rich Malays would have more opportunities than poor Malays regardless of these policies. Additionally, the government inefficiency in implementing affirmative action programs have sometimes resulted in unequal distribution of benefits. However, it is important to note that many programs are based on financial qualification, ensuring that aid is directed towards those in genuine need. Why is affirmative action important in Malaysia? Malaysia's diversity is unique. Unlike other diverse countries that emphasize integration and assimilations, Malaysia adopts a mind-your-own-business attitude. Each racial group in Malaysia prefers to operate independently. The Chinese community, for example, has its own school, business council, political parties, and neighborhoods. This is generally accepted by all, with minorities often preferring the separation more than the majority. Due to this self-segregation, each race tends to support its own members. The Chinese, who had a significant head start aided by the British, tend to assist each other in businesses, scholarship, and various other areas. The same applies to other races. Without affirmative action, the wealthy will become wealthier and the poor poorer, further widening the gap between races and potentially causing racial unrest. This is especially critical for a nation that has just gained independence after 400 years of a foreign rule and finds its wealth concentrated in the hands of a group unrelated to the indigenous population.
The government also changed the language of the schools from English to Malay. And the Chinese, of course, had learned to speak English, but they had not learned to speak Malay. So all of these things made life very difficult.
Malaysia is not a Western country. Malaysians are native English speakers. In the same way Japanese speaks Japanese, Chinese speaks Mandarin, Malaysian speaks Malay. You don't abandon your culture and identity just because you want to kowtow to the Western countries. The country development might be slower, but the lost identity is permanent. Despite that, Malaysia's English proficiency is still a lot better than most Asian countries. Compared to other Southeast Asian countries, Malaysia is the only country that never forced their minorities to assimilate. You can find a minority that is living well here for their whole life not knowing how to speak Malay, the national language.
To this. The other thing which is crucial is that there is no free speech on ethnic matters in Malaysia.
Free speech restriction on race issues is not unique to Malaysia. The concept of free speech is more of a Western ideal, and in most Asian countries, it is limited. Speech that can incite social unrest between races is considered hate speech, a stance common across many Asian nations. When it comes to freedom of speech, Malaysia often performs better than most Southeast Asian countries. For instance, Malaysia's ranking on the World Press Freedom Index was 73, compared to Thailand at 106, Indonesia at 108, and Singapore at 129. It has nothing to do with affirmative actions. Affirmative action played a crucial role in Malaysia's early post-independence years, helping the Malay population gain a foothold after being sidelined for centuries due to British policies. Despite that, Malaysia's affirmative action policies, though well-intentioned, have often been undermined by corruption and government inefficiency, leading to resources being misallocated. Most of the issues lies with the implementation and the government rather than the policy itself. However, affirmative action should only serve to help Malays gain a footing and should not be a permanent policy, as it can stifle competition. This video is brought to you by Carila.com.my. Carila is an online marketplace where you can look for and advertise your products for free. You can advertise your properties, your vehicles, your job listing, and pretty much anything. You can add images and also a video of your products in this website. Increase the visibility of your products for free now in Carila.com.my.